everyone. I've decided that today's the day where I'm going to be transplanting my Variegated Adansonii out of the moss that it's in right now and into my aroid mix, a nice, good, chunky soil, so that it gets a little bit more nutrition and so that I don't have to worry about doing it later on once the roots have kind of overgrown within the moss, which I'm a little bit worried may have already happened. I think anyone who has any familiarity with propagating in moss will know that once the roots really start growing and getting a bit insane, it's really hard to get the moss out without disrupting the roots and breaking a whole bunch of roots. It's growing super well in this sphagnum moss. Take a look at it. I don't know if it'll focus, but it's doing super well. And I'm extremely impressed with how fast it's growing. Since I've had it, I think it's produced 3 new leaves in like 2.5 weeks. So definitely growing very, very rapidly, which is part of the reason why I'm concerned about how much roots are already going to be in there. So we'll get to that in a minute. The soil mix that I'm using is basically kind of my go-to combination for all of my aroids. I don't really usually measure it out. I kind of just go with the flow and dump stuff in and mix it up until it's like a texture consistency that I like. But in this case, I'm basically starting with equal parts of like a compost. I think it's like a garden soil mix. But it seems to be primarily compost, very rich and black. So I'm just kind of dumping that into a container that I'll mix it all up within after. I've got fir bark. This is from the reptile store. I often find the orchid bark a little bit too chunky, like too large of pieces, at least at the place that I go to locally. So this I like a lot for how fine it is. And it's cheaper. Also have some really coarse perlite. Like this stuff is extremely coarse, which I love as well. A lot less powdery than like the Miracle Grow kind or the even the Pro Mix. And horticultural charcoal. This too, I've heard from the person who I acquired the plant from that the Adansonii do appear to really appreciate having a higher amount of charcoal in the mix. So I am doing equal parts for now. I'm going to mix it all together though and kind of see what it's like and kind of go from there. I have extras of everything on the side here, so if I do need to go in and adjust, I can do that after. So let's give this a good mixing. The perlite is very dusty regardless, even though it is the coarse kind. You should always wear a mask if you're working with perlite. I'm not. Do as I say, not as I do. So this is looking pretty good. It's actually a lot chunkier than I think I want. I do want this to retain moisture for a decent amount of time at least, and I don't want to be watering it constantly. So I will add a little bit more of my compost mix. And that should help it out. So you want it so that when you squeeze it, it should kind of crumble apart right away. It shouldn't compact and make like a patty or a ball, basically. You want it to still be able to kind of fall apart loosely, even though there is a good amount of moisture in that compost mix. So this is not dry by any means, but you see it doesn't clump, and that's what we want. And at this point, I think I like the consistency. I think there's a good balance of everything. Now, the one thing that I'm kind of hesitating on is adding any kind of soil amendment, like a fertilizer. because I have had problems in the past where I over fertilize and I use, and the leaves will actually become yellow. Like there's too much buildup of nutrients, and it ends up being toxic to the plant. My poor varicosum was one of the victims of that. Since then, I flushed it out, took a top cutting off of it, propagated it. It's doing well. But I don't want to have to do that with this plant, so I am hesitating. I think the compost mix that's in there is pretty rich already, and right now it's in moss where it doesn't get any nutrients. So I think what I will probably still do, in this little cup here, I have a little bit of bone meal, blood meal, sorry. I think I have a 1/4 teaspoon, as well as a 1/4 teaspoon of the Miracle-Gro shaken feed. Both of those are around, I think both of those would be considered quarter strength compared to what is the recommended dosage for this quantity of soil. So I'm not too concerned. The blood meal is higher in nitrogen. It's basically only nitrogen. There's no phosphorus or potassium. Whereas the shaken feed has a fair amount of potassium. I do want to still have a little bit in there just so that I don't have to worry about feeding quite so regularly in my water. So I'll go ahead and add this. Ideally, I would be using worm castings, but I don't have any available. I can never seem to find it locally, to be honest. I do want to start my own little vermiculture setup so that I can make my own, but I'm not there yet. So until I have that, this does seem to work pretty well. I use this mix in most of my plants, and so far they're all good. The reason I think I had problems with overfeeding my varicosum and a couple of other plants is because I was using these soil amendments on top of a foliar spray, on top of adding Miracle-Gro into my water. So I think just overall it was too much. But now I think just having the soil amendment and the occasional foliar spray, if I think it needs it, we should be okay. So the soil mix is ready. Now comes the fun part of trying to untangle the Adansonii's roots. I have not pulled this out since I got it, so I don't know what this looks like. We're going to discover together. What I do know is that if you look closely, all along the stem, it is already rooted. So there's roots going into the moss pretty much from all along each leaf section. So I know there's going to be a lot going on here. And my goal is to try and do this in such a way that those roots are still kept intact and in the soil, because when I do eventually decide to propagate this, I want those roots, right? It'll make things go that much smoother. So here goes nothing. I do want to actually, have a container here to catch the moss. And I think I am going to reuse this planter. I do have a much larger one next to me. Unfortunately, I'm missing a lot of my medium-sized ones. So I'm going to see if I can just reuse this one. If it does seem too small though, I will probably use this terracotta that I have next to me. Again, like that seems not awful, but a little overkill. So I'm just slowly pulling away at some of the moss to see what we're dealing with. I will likely speed through this part because it is going to be a bit tedious, but already, if you look close, you can see on the main stem, there's a fair amount of roots, and sorry, it doesn't want to focus. As well as in the moss, you can kind of see a fair amount of roots growing in there. I don't know how well it turns out on camera. I'll show once I get a little bit more off. It's not going that bad actually. It's coming off pretty well. I'm surprised. There's a lot of roots, but they're not really tangled together. I think I did this at like the perfect time, to be honest. time when I would actually use the scissors. If you see this long piece of sphagnum moss here, it's attached to a root up near the top. So rather than tug this and risk breaking that root, I am just gonna go ahead and snip it off. Same thing with this guy. Actually, this guy will come off. But we're looking pretty good. I've got a lot of it off. I would say like 90%, maybe 80%. And I'm not gonna worry about getting every last piece off. It's really not the end of the world if there's a little bit in the soil mix at the end. More important is preserving as much of the roots as possible. Now check out those roots. That is beautiful. I mean, the whole plant is beautiful, but these roots, oh, so healthy. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and add some of my soil mix. Just a little bit in the bottom to block the holes. Clean up my mess a bit here first. And I'm basically gonna sit the plant. I do want it to be a little bit more upright because I kind of want to try and make it climb a sort of moss panel in the back so that it continues rooting at every node on the way up. So I am positioning it a little bit more on an angle forward. And I'm just going to slowly start sprinkling in my soil mix. Trying to be careful not to break any roots in the process. So I'm just tapping the pot to get it to go down into the root zone and fall between the roots. And I really want to fill it up to the top as high as I can, because after I'm going to essentially go and add some more sphagnum on top for these additional roots that are coming out here. All right, I think we're good. As I add more. All right, so we're back in the new pot. Filled pretty much all the way up. I want to focus. There's a couple of roots here that I do want to cover with moss as well to get them to continue growing. So I am going to add a little bit of the sphagnum moss back. Just like that. And back in the cash bowl.